All right, welcome to your first video lecture. Throughout the lecture, you'll be able to follow along with the PowerPoint I've created. You should listen carefully and take notes. I want you to keep in mind that even though I'm lecturing on the reading packet, you're still required to read it. I will not lecture on everything within the reading packet, but since you are required to read it, everything within there can be a test question. So you'll want to make sure you read that as well. We're starting with Chapter 1, the Principles of Government, looking at the nature of power, politics, and government. This video lecture will only cover the intro, and then Section 2, which is going to cover the power to rule. I wanted to kind of chunk it so that we could work into this gradually. I don't want to overwhelm you at any point. So this particular chapter is kind of defining what authority is, what power is, and what government is. And really, this unit's going to look at what exactly government is, and then it's helping us to look at it in a way to determine, is government necessary? Some of us can answer this question instantly and say absolutely, and some of us are more hesitant. Historians, people who study the past, might be more hesitant to say absolutely we need government, because if you look at the history of authority and power, it's a roller coaster. And that's kind of what we're going to look at more within this particular chapter. All right, so the intro starts off with just kind of giving a brief synopsis of United States history and how, we kind of started with an explosion of a rebellion, and we go against the British, and we are trying to kind of establish our own government, and just kind of looking at the different things that have happened in history. You can kind of see that people don't really always trust government. Okay, and that also kind of shows in today's popular movies and popular television shows. Um, so, in this attitude that politicians and government in general cannot be trusted, is that justified? Okay, so there is kind of an ancient, I don't want to call him ancient, but Thomas Paine, he's a philosopher, and he's from about, the late 1700s, around the same time where, the United States became a country. And he has a lot of opinions on government, and he kind of believes that it is a necessary evil. Okay, so some of the questions that we're looking at, we're trying to figure out what government is and what it does. And one way to do this is to really focus in on government and power. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the power to rule, and the fact that the power to rule can be gained or lost, but we need to really define what power is. And over the years, it's become more difficult to define power. And it's going to vary from country to country and person to person, okay? I might ask one of you, what's power? And you're like, somebody who holds control. All right, and that to you might be easy to define, but it's not to everybody. When looking at the effects of power, the subject seems to expand and go in many different directions. So we have 5 sources of power, ranging from persuasion to coercion, which is the use of force. The power to rule can be used for positive or negative ends or purposes. So an example of positive ways would be to build cities, promote the arts, feed the poor. Negative ways that power is used is looting the subject's wealth, stealing from them, turning captives into slaves, and even committing mass murder, which we've seen throughout history when we learned about World War II and other events. Okay, so how does power relate to authority? Leaders whose power and authority are accepted by the people they govern are considered to hold what's known as legitimacy. When you look up the definition to legitimacy, it's like pretty much saying that they're legit. Well, that doesn't really define it. So I went ahead and gave you some synonyms that would go with legitimacy, such as lawfulness, legality, and rightfulness. Means they're rightfully there. President Obama, he holds legitimacy because he was voted into office. It's a valid position of power that he holds. Okay, legitimacy rises and falls depending on the willingness of those being led to follow those that are leading. An example of this is a military leader can then seize power by force. An example that you learn about in global studies would be Julius Caesar. All right, his legitimacy was like a roller coaster. It would rise and it would fall, and then in the end, it was his whole demise. Okay, so in the 1500s, powerful European monarchs proclaimed a similar doctrine, which is just like a doctrine. I'm having a brain fart right now. Just kind of like a statement. They had a statement of legitimacy, but it was known as the divine right of kings. This doctrine was similar to what you'd learned about, hopefully, in global studies. It was similar to the mandate of heaven. And it pretty much held the concept and the belief that monarchs were pretty much representatives of God here on earth. And because their right to rule was divine, which means it was God-given, monarchs did not have to answer to the people for their actions. God had granted them absolute power to govern as they saw fit. Not what we believe here in the United States. So before long, some Europeans began to challenge this doctrine. And over time, there's two English philosophers that hopefully you've learned about, whether it was in 8th grade U.S. history or 9th grade global studies, but two philosophers, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, they were very popular philosophers who held strong opinions when it came to government. And they believed in what was known as the social contract theory of government. And according to this theory, the legitimacy of a government stems from an unwritten contract between the ruler and those who are ruled. So pretty much it's kind of like it's unwritten, but it's believed by the ruler, it's believed by the people, and within this contract, they do things for one another, such as, that ruler protects them, and the people may farm the land and then give that to the king. So under the terms of the contract, though, the people agree to obey a ruler in exchange for the ruler's promise to protect their rights. And a ruler who breaks the contract by abusing their power will lose their legitimacy and will be removed from power. Another example of this is the French Revolution and King Louis XVI. Okay, so the foundations of government, so looking at the underlines of it, making sure I'm going through all my notes. Okay, that's actually going to be section 3. So we're going to pretty much kind of conclude section 1, which is the intro, wrap up section 2, which is the power to rule, and just kind of look back and compare your notes. Make sure you've done the reading. If you have any questions, you need to contact me, and we are going to talk about everything on Friday, and when you are done with this one, you can move on to the next lecture video, which is going to cover section 3 as well as section 4, and then I'll do 5 and 6 together. Alrighty.